Donald Trump is doubling down on his global trade tariffs. The president says he's raising a new levy on imports from the U.S.'s worldwide trading partners from 10 to 15%. Trump responding to a United States Supreme Court ruling striking down most of his previous trade tariffs. Justices ruled they were imposed illegally. For more on this, let's bring in DW correspondent Rosie Birchard joining us from Brussels. Rosie, we've seen tariffs struck down, then reintroduced at 10% and now pushed up to 15%. How are these ups and downs being received in Brussels?
Yeah, it feels like a really familiar sense of déjà vu here because, of course, the European Union spent a lot of the first half of last year trying to work out what kind of a tariff rate businesses and exporters here might be facing. And that means that there's just a whole lot of uncertainty for businesses again. And it's not so much what officials here in Brussels think. So far, they are saying that they are assessing the decision, that they're in contact with the US administration to try and work out what the consequences might be. But it's really for industries and businesses here, because I've been talking to firms over this past almost a year since we first had those announcements of so-called reciprocal tariffs. And what they tell me is that it's the unpredictability that is the strain as much in a way as the tariffs themselves, because when they're trying to make decisions about whether to, say, open a new factory, to hire more people, to invest in a new technology, maybe to fire people, all of these things are really difficult decisions to make when you don't know what the future holds. And of course, the context here is that this is a moment where there's a real feeling that the European economy needs something of a shot in the arm. The EU's share of global GDP has been falling for years. So this fresh sense of businesses not really knowing where they stand, that adds to that overall feeling of a lack of confidence in the economic prospects here in Europe in general.
And I remember last summer, the EU and the United States agreed on a 15% set tariff on European exports. These new developments, how do they actually change things for the EU?
Yeah, and Melissa, it's worth noting, first of all, that deal was considered a really bad deal for Europe. It was seen as just what they had to accept in precisely to try and avoid that uncertainty. Now, in practical terms, it's not really, it looks like there won't be that much change here because businesses will still face tariffs. I think in the on-paper discussion, we're likely to hear different points of view as to whether the fact that there's the legal basis of the United States is changing, whether that impacts the deal. And I think as a first step, the European Parliament Trade Committee, which was due to vote this coming week on the next steps of finalising that deal that was signed off last July, that vote will likely be delayed. And again, they'll say, look, we are still just trying to assess the consequences of this here. And that could set up a whole next round of debates for future.
And any sense that EU lawmakers will retaliate? What do you think we can expect?
Look, retaliation is always the most bitter of debates here in Europe because the fact is the EU has quite a lot of muscle on trade. If they want to retaliate hard, they could. But I think at this stage, for now, at least in the short term, we won't really hear any talk of retaliation because they don't really know exactly what the consequences are. But in the longer term, this could reignite debate around the use of the EU's so-called trade bazooka. That's illegal powers that the European Commission legislated for a few years ago in order to be able to hit back really hard if it faces cases of what it sees as economic coercion. And just imagine this is a hypothetical scenario. If Trump's new tariffs are questioned legally down the line, he has to find some other justification for tariffs on the European Union, he may well look into the likes of the European Union's tech laws. We know the US administration has been raging against the EU's tech rulebook in general, saying it's designed to target US companies. That's something the European Commission denies. But if he goes down that road, that could look like a case of economic coercion. And then we could see this whole debate again here in Europe on whether to use that trade bazooka tool. Listen, it's all hypothetical for now. That's purely speculative. But the point is it sets up debate on what retaliation might look like.
DW correspondent in Brussels, Rosie Birchard, thank you. Stephen Woolcock is visiting associate at the International Trade Policy Hub at the London School of Economics. Welcome. Stephen, with the tariffs struck down, then reintroduced at 10% and now pushed up to 15%, has the global economy ever witnessed this kind of whiplash before?
Well, we've already seen unpredictability as a result of the weaponization of tariff policies by the US. So really, this is nothing new. I mean, this is the original tariffs introduced in February last year were modified, changed. There were different exceptions made. So generally, this is bad news for international trade and investment because trade and investment needs predictability. So the US weaponization has already undermined that internationally. Now we're seeing domestic uncertainty introduced because of the Supreme Court ruling. But in a sense, it was expected. It was quite on the cards that the Supreme Court would throw this out because it's clearly not the intention of the legislation, the law on which it was based. So the expectation was always that the Trump administration would continue with its policies of tariff protection, whatever happened.
And how dangerous is this level of tariff volatility for the global economy? I mean, people keep reporting in that way, but if you could give us some context and perspective.
Well, as I say, international trade needs predictability. Business needs predictability to make decisions on investment and exports. And in a sense, a set level of tariff or set level of restriction, business can generally say it will live with that, it will plan with it. It may mean less trade, less economic prosperity and greater costs, but business can live with it. But this continued chop and changing uncertainty is why we have international trade rules, which is why we have domestic trade legislation so that governments can't do this sort of thing. So it is very disruptive. It's more disruptive than the level of tariff itself, is the uncertainty is.
Right. And I wonder how much leverage does the European Union actually have to renegotiate anything with Washington?
Well, the EU has considerable leverage in the past, or in response to the first set of unilateral tariffs. The EU opted not to retaliate because that was seen to be damaging everyone and damaging the EU economy more. We have to, so it has the power to retaliate, but we'll have to see what happens. Already, I think the European Parliament's Committee on International Trade is saying that it will now freeze ratification of the previous agreement, the bilateral agreement that was reached. And the member states will have to come together and decide how to respond to what is going on.
Right.
I suspect, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Please finish your final thought.
I suspect they would still be cautious in not wanting to retaliate too dramatically, because I think this is the sign that the US trade policy is really beginning to unravel. I mean, it's clear to everyone that it's not a feasible, viable policy. And it must be clear to make US interests now that that's the case. So I think the EU will probably try to not react too much, but wait for domestic changes to take place in the US to bring some sense to what's happening.
Stephen Woolcock from the London School of Economics, thank you very much.
Thank you.